Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful. I'd like to welcome you, dear viewers, to another in our series, Contemporary Issues, in which we look at a variety of ideas or concepts which have become very popular in the world today, promoted by Western civilization, accepted by Muslim countries to varying degrees, or by the intellectual elite or the educated elements of the society, where these ideas have become very popular and they challenge the fundamental concepts which are held by Islam with regards to these various issues. The topic that we'll be looking at today is a very vast topic, and it's a topic concerning criminal justice, the Islamic legal system, and how its laws are applied. What people tend to focus on is that the criminal justice system of Islam is very harsh. It's referred to as being medieval, primitive, a variety of different terms used because the image given of the application of Islamic law is really one of chopping off of hands and chopping off of heads and lashings and stonings, and this is the general image given, that this is just something impractical in our time, something which modern civilization has left behind, no longer applicable and of no benefit, really something which was primitive. This is the general impression given. However, when we look at the issue of criminal justice, and perhaps at the core of it is the issue of capital punishment, which has been banned by the UN as well as the ECC. We look at it and how it has developed in Western civilization. For example, in America and the West in general, the main goals behind Western penology, we could say, were three. One, retribution, that is, justification looking to the past, that is, punishment or revenge. Two, deterrence, and that was looking to the future, and that is prevention. And three, reformation, to reform the individual, to make that individual a better personality, a better character, to be released back in society. Now, these were the basic principles behind Western penology. However, from as early as the late 30s, we find a report of the Departmental Committee on Corporal Punishment in England stating that corporal punishment was of no value as a deterrent and should be abolished. In 1952, Justice Hugo Black, this is the United States of America, he wrote that retribution is no longer the dominant objective of criminal law. Reformation and rehabilitation of offenders have become important goals of criminal jurisprudence. And in 1972, Justice Thurgood Marshall, this is again of the United States, the Supreme Court, he wrote, punishment for the sake of retribution is not permissible under the Eighth Amendment. In the same year, California's capital punishment law was declared unconstitutional. For some criminologists, reformation has become synonymous with cure. The criminal was no longer considered to be a bad man, but a sick man. And the convict needed treatment. He was genuinely ill, perhaps physically, almost certainly mentally and psychologically. This was the approach which Western criminal justice took. And in 1965 in England, the death penalty was abolished. However, some 5 years later, in 1970, when the Home Secretary announced that 172 convicted murderers had been released from prison since 1960, that's over a period of 10 years, he pointed out that most of them had only served 9 years or less of their statutory life sentence. Only 5 served 12 or more years, 9 served 6 or less, and 1 completed only 6 months. And these were not cases of mistaken judgments where they were revising judgment. These are people who were convicted murderers, but due to the change in attitudes, good behavior in prison, people were being let out. Somebody murdered somebody and was let out after 6 months. 9 of them were let out after 6 years or less, after murdering somebody. And of course, the reality is that these individuals, after being let out into the public, a number of them ended up killing others and ended up back in jail again for further murders. Today, Western penologists have admitted that the penal system has utterly failed in reforming and rehabilitating criminals. The reality is that the petty criminal who enters into the system spends time with well-trained, hardened criminals, and he comes out prepared. Now he's got all the information he needs to go on to major crime. So it becomes a training ground for criminals. And the society ends up paying for their crimes by providing them with housing, food, clothing, and shelter for the period of their sentence. So the society pays for their crime. In the Islamic systems, punishments are placed basically in 3 categories. One category known as hudud, and these are the fixed punishments which have been set by Allah in the Quran or by the statements of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And these are considered to be rights of God. There are 6 basic offenses which come under that heading. That is of drinking, alcohol, theft, armed robbery, illicit sex, and that includes homosexual, pedophilic, and bestiality type sexual deviations, sexual slander, apostasy. All of these are included in this system. The second group are referred to as qisas, or retaliatory punishments, where an injury or murder takes place and an equivalent punishment is set for that. And this is considered under the headings of the rights of people. And the third category is that of ta'zir, or what may be called discretionary punishments, where no specific punishments are set aside in the law, where the judge may, depending on his own ruling, depending on how he sees the seriousness of a particular crime, he may prescribe any particular punishment. Now, of course, these punishments cannot reach the level of those of the hudud themselves, the ones which are fixed by Allah. But in terms of the application of Islamic law, because when we're going to judge, is this applicable, is it relevant, is it beneficial, etc., we have to look to see what are the effects. What you find is that during the Ottoman administration of the Arabian Peninsula, the hudud punishments were discontinued. But by the late 20s, after the Saudi regime reintroduced them, the crime rate had fell noticeably. And this has continued. Basically in Saudi Arabia, you find the level of crime is quite low. If you compare, 8 million people in England, in Saudi Arabia, compare them to 8 million people in New York City, and you compare the crime rates, I mean, it's like night and day. The number of murders which take place, for execution, people are executed for murder, which is for quickly